surge has come. Furious tides split the heavens.
Did you know you can permanently stay in her Fleurdelys form and even hover in midair? Hello citizens! Cartethyia is finally here with her fun dual form mechanics and sick animations. In this video, I'll go over everything from her core mechanics to gameplay and rotations with and without Ciaccona and Aero Rover, and end with her best builds along with my polling recommendations. First, here's a quick overview of what Cartethyia brings to the table. Cartethyia is an Aero Erosion DPS. She is also our very first HP scaling DPS. Cartethyia can apply Aero Erosion in her base form, but once she transforms into Fleurdelys, she consumes Aero Erosion stacks to deal extra damage. One really cool thing about her is that her rotation is fairly flexible and you can change and even extend the rotation depending on the situation. Here's how Cartethyia works. Cartethyia has two forms, feet and no feet. I mean, small Cartethyia, or her base form, and a big Cartethyia, or Fleurdelys, her enhanced form. Both forms have their own unique idle animations, and you can only transform into Fleurdelys after using Cartethyia's Liberation. As base Cartethyia, your main goal is to summon 3 different swords to activate powerful buffs for Fleurdelys. These swords are also how you light up her Forte gauge. I really like how they actually integrated these swords into her kit. Here is how you summon the 3 swords, along with her corresponding buffs. First, Cartethyia a basic 4 summons the middle sword and also applies 1 stack of Aero Erosion. Her intro and dodge counter also directly turbos you into basic 2. One trick here is that you can animation cancel her basic 4 as soon as you see this portal appear. Next, Cartethyia's resonance skill summons the rightmost sword and also inflicts 2 stacks of Aero Erosion and leaves her midair. This is the skill that can let you hover anywhere as long as you have stamina. Finally, Cartethyia's heavy attack, or her intro, summons the last sword on the left. Her intro also applies 2 stacks of Aero Erosion. However, just summoning the swords isn't enough. To activate the buffs, you also have to recall them with a mid-air plunge attack. You can tell if you succeeded if swirling circles appear around each sword. Cartethyia's plunge also deals more damage when you recall all 3 swords at once. So a simple and effective combo for Cartethyia is intro into basic 2, 3, and 4, animation cancel with resonance skill, and then press basic attack to mid-air plunge. This summons all 3 swords and instantly recalls them to activate all her buffs at once. Once the sword buffs are active, you can use Cartethyia's Liberation to transform into Fleurdelys. This transformation will reduce her HP to 50% of her max HP, but don't worry, she can heal it back later. As Fleurdelys, you get a whole new set of attacks and a 12-second window where your sword buffs are active. On Fleurdelys, your goal is to use her attacks to fill her Forte gauge, which then lets you unleash her Purge All Evil attack. This deals a huge chunk of damage, though it also ends her transformation. But for those who want to use Fleurdelys to explore the overworld, as long as you don't use Purge All Evil or press Liberation again, you can actually stay on Fleurdelys indefinitely. Now, let's talk about how Aero Erosion plays into her kit. Both of Cartethyia's forms rely on having high Aero Erosion stacks. Her passive alone gives her up to 60% bonus arrow damage based on the number of stacks. On top of that, if you remember from earlier, one of her sword buffs makes Aero Erosion trigger twice as quickly. Since more stacks mean higher damage per trigger, this faster rate makes having higher stacks more valuable as well. Lastly, Fleurdelys also consume stacks in 2 different ways to deal more damage. All of these mechanics together mean you really want a way to maintain high Aero Erosion stacks. One nice thing about her kit though is that during the first 12 seconds as Fleurdelys, you can freely swap between her 2 forms by pressing Liberation. Swapping back also pauses the buff timer. Since Cartethyia can apply some Aero Erosion stacks, you can tactfully swap back to reapply some erosion if you need to before swapping back to Fleurdelys. I will go over my recommended rotations for Fleurdelys later in the video. A TLDR of her kit, as Cartethyia you use different attacks to summon 3 different swords, recall them to get buffs, and then transform into Fleurdelys using her liberation. Afterwards, you use attacks to fill up the new Forte gauge while your buffs are active, and then finish with Purge All Evil, all while trying to keep as many stacks of Aero Erosion on the enemy as possible. When it comes to her teams, Cartethia's best in slot premium team is without a doubt Ciaccona and Aero Rover. They have incredible synergy together, and this setup feels quite a bit more powerful than the alternatives. I have videos showcasing runs with different teams if you want to see the performances for yourself. While higher sequences can lessen her reliance on these specific resonators, let me first go over why this team is so effective at S0. Ciaccona's consistent off-field application of Aero Erosion makes her invaluable. With Ciaccona on the team, you can easily maintain the maximum stacks of Aero Erosion even while Fleurdelys is actively consuming them. Furthermore, Ciaccona's outro, which provides an 100% Aero Erosion damage amp, substantially buffs all Aero Erosion damage. Meanwhile, Aero Rover is also a crucial piece due to their special outro mechanic, which increases the maximum Aero Erosion stacks from 3 to 6. This directly translates to an extra 30% bonus damage for Cartethyia from her passive, plus up to 40% more damage amplification on her Purge All Evil attack. On top of that, Rover's sword amplification buff also increases the team's damage. In version 2.4, we can refine this up to R3. So, what if you're missing Ciaccona or Aero Rover? Luckily, even if you're missing one or the other, her kit doesn't just fall apart. Priority-wise, Ciaccona makes the bigger difference on the team. Her consistent erosion application and damage amp are simply too good. Even without Aero Rover, you can run Cartethyia Ciaccona Shorekeeper or Cartethyia Ciaccona and Sanhua. Both variations performed surprisingly well in my testing and felt just a step behind the top team. A quick note on Sanhua, she is fantastic here not just for her quick rotation, but also because her outro buffs basic attack damage, which for Cartethyia accounts for nearly half of her total damage. If you don't have Ciaccona, honestly, Ciaccona is a great character, and you should just pull for her on her rerun. I mean, without Ciaccona, you can also just run Cartethyia, Aero Rover, and Shorekeeper, or Cartethyia, Aero Rover, and Sanhua. Both of these teams work, but damage-wise, they will be noticeably lower. And for those who have neither Ciaccona nor Aero Rover... Wait, what do you mean you don't have Aero Rover? Don't worry. In this case, you can still run a team like Cartethyia, Sanhua, and Shorekeeper. And this is the point I want to emphasize. Even without either of these units, Cartethyia can still function. Because Cartethyia can inflict Aero Erosion herself, she can still output respectable damage on her own. However, the overall team damage will definitely be lower compared to the teams with Ciaccona or Rover. Once again, you can check out my other videos for a quick comparison of the actual runs. Moving on to rotations. For her premium team with Ciaccona and Aero Rover, here are the rotations I've been using. One is a more straightforward combo that's great against multiple targets like in Whimpering Wastes. The other is a slightly more complex rotation that will give you higher damage output versus single targets. Here's a play-by-play. I like to first start with Cartethia's skill, which puts her in midair. Then I immediately swap to Ciaccona to use her basic 4 to spawn a clone, which starts buffing arrow damage. Next, I swap to Aero Rover since you want their outro buff first. Aero Rover's first rotation usually starts with skill into 2 midair slashes, plunge, and then basic 4. Then you repeat with skill into 2 aerial slashes again, but this time you use liberation right after the second slash. You can then follow up with Echo and Forte skill before swapping to Ciaccona. Keep in mind, Rover can cast both parts of his Forte skill off-field. On Ciaccona, you can just go with her normal rotation. I have a full Ciaccona guide explaining this in detail if you're interested. After using her liberation, we can intro directly into Cartethyia. This is where the fun begins. On Cartethyia, after summoning all her swords and then recalling them, I like to first jump before transforming via liberation. This lets you use Fleurdelys' midair 1 and midair 2 right away, and then you can plunge down with her midair 3. This accelerates her ground combo, letting you go straight into basic 3, 4, and 5. Oh, and here's a tip. You can animation cancel her basic 5. Here, as soon as she starts to bring her sword down, you can cancel the animation using her skill 1. Skill 1 will put you back into the air, and she can follow up with another midair 1 into midair 2. This time, after midair 2, use skill 2 to plunge back down, and you can once again continue directly from basic 3. And as soon as you see her basic 5 sword start to go down, you can animation cancel with the Purge All Evil. This rotation lets Fleurdelys trigger 5 extra instances of Aero Erosion and benefit from the full 12-second buffs. The general idea for this team versus single target is that you almost never want to do her full basic 1 to 5 combo. Using jump or her skill 1 into an aerial combo lets you accelerate into basic 5 as well as trigger more instances of Aero Erosion damage. Also, keep in mind that with Ciaccona, you can comfortably stay as Fleurdelys a bit longer to finish off a low HP enemy. Ideally, you don't stay on her for too long or you'll lose your team-wide buffs. Here are some rotations for Cartethyia without Aero Rover, followed by Cartethyia without Ciaccona. The strategy changes slightly for those without Ciaccona, since you'll either want to keep your Fleurdelys rotation short to avoid consuming all your erosion stacks, or you'll want to swap to base Cartethyia to reapply erosion in between before using her Purge All Evil attack. I have full runs showcasing all of these rotations in my other video. On to Cartethyia's build. For Cartethia's echoes, there's a new Aero DPS set in 2.4, the Windward Pilgrimage. This is the one you'll want to use on her as it gives her 10% crit rate and 40% bonus damage. This next part is important. For her echo configuration, since Cartethyia is our first HP scaling resonator, you'll actually want to use a 4-4-1-1-1 setup instead of the traditional 4-3-3-1-1. This is because 1-cost echoes come with flat HP as their secondary stat, so you're essentially double dipping. 3-cost echoes, on the other hand, come with flat attack, which doesn't benefit Cartethyia at all. With similar substats, a 4-4-1-1-1 setup will generally be over 5% better than 4-3-3-1-1. It's not a game-breaking difference though, so you could still use 4-3-3-1-1 if you roll better on those respective echoes. For Cartethia's Forte levels, prioritize her Forte circuit and Liberation first, and then her Resonance skill and normal attack. Her intro will be the lowest priority. In terms of Cartethia's weapon choices, her signature sword will be over 15% better than her best alternative. This is primarily because it's the only 5-star sword that gives HP %, along with some defense ignore and damage amplification. However, if you don't want to pull for her signature, you can also use these other 5-star swords, and even the 3-star Guardian sword. For those looking to invest more into Cartethyia, my general recommendation is to prioritize her signature weapon over her S1, unless you're planning to pull for her S2 or S3, both of which are major power spikes. Her S2 increases the maximum Aero Erosion stacks by another 3. This is huge because it can potentially free up Aero Rover on your team. Though if you keep Rover, you can now reach an insane cap of 9 stacks, which with Ciaccona can deal around 37k damage per tick. Her S3 allows her Fleurdelys form to start inflicting Aero Erosion herself on the very hits that used to consume it. This makes Cartethyia stack positive all by herself and removes her heavy reliance on Ciaccona. Her S4 and 5 are minor increases, but Cartethyia's S6 is arguably one of the strongest S6s in the game. You will once again, however, need Ciaccona at S6 to fully benefit, since at S6, whenever any character on the team applies Aero Erosion to an enemy that currently has max stacks, it will instantly trigger an additional proc of Aero Erosion damage. So Ciaccona's consistent 1.5 second Aero Erosion proc can keep triggering that extra damage tick over and over again. Anyways, I personally think S0R1 is a good stopping point, but S2 or S3 is also pretty good value. In terms of polling recommendations, for those with Ciaccona, I highly recommend Cartethyia. The team is incredibly powerful and the rotation is fun and flexible. For those without Ciaccona, I'd say you can absolutely still pull for Cartethyia, especially if you like her design, or her gameplay. Her kit is pretty fun, her animations are top tier, and you're essentially getting 2 characters in one, since you can permanently stay as Fleurdelys as well. If you do pull for her, you also have 2 clear paths forward to increase her power later on. You can either pull Ciaccona on her rerun, or you can choose to invest vertically into Cartethyia sequences instead. In summary, Cartethyia is a powerful and unique Aero DPS with an engaging dual form playstyle. She is our first HP scaling hypercarry who excels in both single target and multi-target content. Her ceiling is incredibly high with her premium team, but she is also flexible enough to function even without them. I think that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and let me know in the comments what you think of Cartethyia and if you have any other questions. I will also be streaming the new patch on Twitch and YouTube, so you can join in and hang out. See you on stream or in my next video.